Hello everyone. Today I'm going to give you the summary of The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. Khushwant Singh was born in February 1915 and he died in the year 2014 in the month of March. Khushwant Singh has to his credit the Padma Bhushan, the Padma Vibhushan and the Punjab Ratna Award. The Portrait of a Lady is a part of an autobiography by Khushwant Singh. In the story, the author draws a pen portrait of specifically his grandmother. He beautifully unfolds their relationship and how it undergoes several changes in the course of time. In other words, it is a loving tribute from a grandson to his grandmother. The story gives us a picture of human relationships. It is a realistic account of how the grandparents give all their time, attention, and love to their grandchildren. Even many of you are fortunate enough to have it even today. The summary goes like this. The author remembers his grandmother and grandfather. He recalls his grandmother as a very old lady. For 20 years, he had found her to be old and wrinkled. It is hard for him to believe that she had once been young and pretty and even had a husband. His grandfather's portrait hung on the wall of the drawing room, wearing a big turban, wearing loose clothes, and he looked at least 100 years old. Looking at his portrait, one could imagine in his youth with his wife and children. He was very, very old. It seems like telling the story of his grandparents. Khushwant Singh treated it like the fables of the prophets that grandmother herself used to tell Khushwant Singh. He gives a description of his grandmother. The thought of the grandmother being young and pretty was almost revolting to him. It was very difficult for him to accept it. She was short, fat, and slightly bent in stature. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles. Her silvery white hair was scattered over her wrinkled face. The author remembered her hobbling around the house in spotless white clothes with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop and the other hand busy counting the beads of her rosary. Her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. To the author, she could never have been pretty, but she reflected a divine beauty. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains. Expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. Winter landscape in the mountain. The mountains are covered with snow during the winters. So in a similar way, the author is comparing his grandmother to the winter landscape in the mountains. Then he goes on to reflect on his childhood with his grandmother. He says that they were very good friends. His parents left him to stay with her when they shifted to the city. In the village, his grandmother took care of all his needs. She was very active, very caring, and very agile. She used to wake him up in the morning and get him ready for school. She said her morning prayers in a sing-song manner while she bathed and dressed him in the hope that he would learn it by heart. The author listened to those prayers of the grandmother because he loved her voice but never ever bothered to learn them by heart. That is the typical grandmotherly attitude. Yes, they all like us to, know the hymns of the scriptures. And to tell you frankly, it really helps us. It gives a divine pleasure, which we just can't describe it. Once you feel it, then only you can feel the divinity, the pleasure of it. Then he goes on to say that she would fetch his wooden slate, which she had washed and plastered it with yellow chalk. Those days, you can just imagine, they used to write on the slate. I don't think so you people have done it. So you can just imagine. She would take an earthen ink pot and a reed pen and tie them in a bundle and hand it to the author. So that was his school bag like. After having a thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it for breakfast, they both used to leave for school. The author's grandmother always accompanied him to the school as it was attached to the temple. She would be sitting there at the temple. The priest of the temple taught children the alphabet and the morning prayer. The children sat in 2 rows in the veranda. They would sing the alphabet or the prayer in a chorus. While the author learned his lessons at school, the grandmother read scriptures in the adjoining temple. On their way back, they would feed stale chapatis to the dogs. So here you can analyze, you have to analyze the character of the grandmother. So love towards animals is being reflected here too at the same time. As you read, as you are in the senior secondary wing, so you have to analyze it from these angles. Now what happened, that there was a turning point in their friendship, a climax in their friendship. When did it happen? When they moved to the city to stay with Khushwant Singh's parents. In the city, the author went to an English medium school in a motor bus, and the grandmother was not able to accompany him to the school. As there were no dogs in the streets, the grandmother took to feeding the sparrows. So that was quite a turning point in their friendship. Because when they go to school, they shared so many things. Yes, but now he used to get less time to spend with his grandmother. As the years rolled by, they saw less of each other. He was also growing. His burden of studies was there. Okay. In spite of her interest in studies, she could not help him in his lessons as he was learning English. He used to learn science, the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, and many more such things which she could not understand. And this made her unhappy that she could not, help the grandson with his studies. Sometimes she would ask him what the teacher had taught him. She would take the feedback, like, what did you do at school today? Grandmother was disturbed at that point of time. She didn't believe in the things taught in the English school and was distressed to learn that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures in the school. He was growing and he was going to a senior class, isn't it? So definitely there was no teaching directly of scriptures and about God directly. Moreover, she was very disturbed at the idea of music being taught in the school, because she associated music with lewd people, indecent people. Yes, and she thought that music was not suitable for the gentle folk. Then he went to the university and he was given a room of his own. And the common link of friendship between the author and the grandmother was broken then. Previously, at least they were sharing the same room. And after coming back from the school, at least he used to share certain things. But now, after getting his own room, he rarely had any time to speak to his grandmother. The grandmother accepted her loneliness and rarely spoke to anyone. She developed a different state of mind. Okay? All day long, she would sit with the spinning the wheel and reciting her prayers. Only in the afternoon, she would relax for a while to feed the sparrows. They perched on her shoulders and some even on her head, but she never shooed them away. Her love for animals. It used to be the happiest half hour of the day for her. Then what happens? The author, after completing his university studies there, he plans to go abroad for higher studies for few years. For few years, he was sure that his grandmother, she would be upset at this departure about that idea. And but she was not even sentimental. She was very strong in nature. She came to the railway station, yes, to see him off. She showed no emotion. She was absorbed in her own world, in her prayers, and counting the beads of her rosary. Okay? She was religious. We got to know that she was religious. She was not emotional. She was very practical. She was a very strong lady. Silently, he kissed his forehead. Silently, she kissed his forehead. The author thought that perhaps that was the last sign of physical contact between them. Because, why? Because he is going for many years. Okay? And at that age, you can't take anything for granted. Now, after 5 years, after completion of his studies abroad, when he happens to come back, she was met. Yes, she went to meet him at the railway station, to his surprise. She held him in her arms. Yes, hugged him. She found her more religious and self-contained. At that point of time, the author found her more religious and she's self-contained, she's engrossed in her world and she's happy with that. He could hear her reciting prayers even that day. She didn't break from her routine. For us, what happens? When we go to our grandparents' house, they keep busy, isn't it? Entertaining us, giving us food, this, that. But that was not so with this grandmother. In course of time, of course, when she began to realize that it was not in her way. So even that day, when the grandson came, her happiest moment was feeding the sparrows herself. She didn't give up. However, something strange happened to her in the evening. For the first time, yes, what did she do? She did not pray. Instead, she collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started singing songs of the homecoming of warriors. The family tried to persuade her to, stop, to avoid straining herself. But she didn't listen at all. She fell ill the next morning. Okay? So you can just relate. The grandmother's morning. In the morning, she was diagnosed with a mild fever by the doctor, but she insisted that her end was near. Sometimes many people come to know when they are going to die. Yes, she told everyone that her end was near, and she would like to, would spend her last moments praying and not talking to anybody. She ignored everybody's protests and started counting the beads in her rosary while praying. So she was a religious, you have seen, I think, many old people, they come to know that their death is very near. And then finally what happened? After a short while, the author noticed that his grandmother's lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. She died, and a peaceful death, a pallor spread across her. And then, to tell you surprisingly, the sparrows mourn her death. When the author and others came to take away the grandmother's body, they were met with a strange sight. To mourn her death, a lot of birds, the sparrows, had surrounded the grandmother's body. She used to feed those sparrows actually every day, so they have come. But they were no longer chirping. It is very strange. They were all silent. When the author's mother offered the sparrows some bread, they refused to eat and quietly flew away after the grandmother's body was carried away for the last rites. And the next morning, the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. Hope you got the summary of this chapter. Thank you. Please read the chapter thoroughly. Yes, thank you.